Hi, my name is Sokuzan, and I'm one of Sokuzan's monks. Sokuzan so freely offers his love to us and his wisdom through these talks, and never asks us for anything in return. If you value what he does and what he is, and want them to continue, please visit our donate page at SokukoJi.org. Thank you.
Greetings. This morning, Dharma talk title is basically was it mountains and more mountains? So it's basically just a session where you ask questions and I'll respond. I can always come up with talk titles and talk about that title. But today I just wanted to open it up to questions. You can take that any direction you want. But first I'd like to ask you if you frequent this Dharma talk, which has been going on for many years, and that if this is valuable to you, then you could help us out, support us. Go to the donate page and see what you can do there, if you can. So now I've asked, now you ask. Give me a question. Isaac, why don't you give me that question? You suggested a Dharma talk title, and I think that might be a good place to start.
Isaac Bowing. It was about damage control. I feel like I associate when I speak in front of sangha or you, there's kind of a sense of saying something wrong. So that's the so-called damage that I want to go in and control it with the three poisons. So I'm wondering what about that speaking is risky?
Well, speaking might feel risky because we know that people are listening and people are probably maybe agreeing, passion, maybe disagreeing. That could be anything from ignorance to actual warfare or aggression. But people are invariably going to take some kind of position on anything you say or do. No way around that. It just seems to be a spontaneous thing that human beings do to provide them with a sense of continuity, that they're here and they're hearing someone and they have an idea about it, they have an opinion, they have a response. But it is very possible, and even perhaps more balanced, to not do anything with it, just receive. As I sometimes often say, and I'll say now, you don't have to study you don't have to understand the Dharma, but you have to study it. You're going to be on this path. Trying to understand it based on your presumption about what understanding is could actually create problems. So, do you have a further question?
Isaac Bowing. So like after I start speaking, it's like the floodgates of negative thoughts kind of just open.
Yes.
And are those negative thoughts more valuable to observe than neutral ones or positive ones?
So I think to try to find out if there's some kind of more value here or value there. This is a form of, this is actually the language of ego and the language of materialism, to try to get an advantage, to get ahead, to get more. So they're all thoughts, they're all emotions, they're all just that. We tend to personalize them by making one better than the other. Or I shouldn't be saying, or I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have asked that question. That would be like me getting up here, giving a Dharma talk, and then after the Dharma talk thinking, I really shouldn't have said it that way. I should have. Let me help you a little bit here. You may be surprised because you might feel that I need to work on these talks quite a bit. But I don't have any regrets about it. Not at all. Even if I miss sometimes on occasion, because I'm not very adept at memorizing all these words. Sometimes I'll misquote something. That is not a mistake. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should ask me, and I will endeavor with concepts, because that's what I'm trapped in, just the same way you are. Attribution of wrongness to an identity just strengthens that identity. It's just as strong through being wrong, shame, as it is through being right, pride. Take your pick, or don't take any pick. Don't pick anything, but just have a willingness to just be with whatever you're producing. And in that way, what is important in that area is the awareness around that, the awareness that sees the differentiation and desire that is that we wrap ourselves up in, like a ball of yarn or something. It's just like a prison of our own thoughts and ideas and beliefs and right and wrong and should be and shouldn't do. More?
Isaac bowing, not right now.
So I'd say on top of what I was responding to there, I would say just observe it. Most important thing, if you want to know something that's important, is just observe it, just receive it. Just like weather. You don't have to deliberately depersonalize it, but you can put a little bit of a tether or a little bit of a line on going in and criticizing it or shutting it down. Take some time to do that. Years, not months. Other questions?
Kevin bowing.
Kevin.
A few talks ago, you said something about in Shikantaza that whatever our eye rests upon is ego. Could you explain what you mean by that, bowing?
I'll try to. So I was just using that as opening the eye mind has an eye spot. And I was just using that as that has it resonates with that kind of situation. We always look at whatever we look at, we're ignoring everything else. This is what the ego does. It fastens on something and demands or likes it or doesn't like it or is indifferent to it, but it's right through that contact. And that area is pretty much controlled by the self-centered aspect of the mind, the seventh consciousness, that part of the consciousness that is paranoid about everything. And so when I teach opening the eye mind, I say, find a spot basically in the center, look at that, and then you can move your awareness spot anywhere through different approaches that I've listed. There's probably half or a dozen or other ones that you could invent yourself, moving around in the awareness. So to fasten down on something and look at it is the very nature of ego, is to fixate. So this doesn't mean you can't look for look in your drawer and try to find a soup spoon. Of course, you're going to have to look at that. But that kind of looking is totally situational and doesn't involve some kind of self that's trying to get something, control something, stop something, start something. There's no particular agenda about it other than I'd like to have a soup spoon rather than a regular teaspoon. It's a very simple situation happening there rather than the one that is fluffed up that the ego tends to push and operate. So the eye spot, just simply put, and not to go into OTEM or opening the eye mind particularly, but if you took a cross and put it through the center of a painting, the center is the eye spot, just because it's the center of the whole rectangle. You put your eyes there and leave them there, and then move your awareness around, peripheral awareness around, with particular ways of doing it, or either just casually, just roaming around, going in circles. And when you do that, you'll notice all kinds of things come into the awareness that you could not see with your eye spot. Your eye spot is completely conceptual, whereas the roving awareness is not conceptual from the point of view of locking down. It is just naturally open and receives colors, shapes, receives things and it receives in a language that you can't even convert into concepts. I highly encourage people to practice that so I can get people to listen. But it has a similarity to being locked down. If you just watch the ego, then you can move the awareness. It takes practice. If you just watch what moves, that's the eye spot. And then the awareness is everywhere else. liberate yourself by looking at the prison you're in, your beliefs, your ideas, your intense emotions about this, your convictions, principles. More, Kevin?
Not right now, thank you. Bowing.
Ondo.
Wonder bowing. Is it possible to see something without the ego? And when you're looking at the periphery, is that?
There's no way the ego can control that periphery because it needs to actually lock down, and peripheral awareness can't lock down because it doesn't really see it in the same direct receptive way where you can actually name something. Not that you can't see that on this side of the room is a red chair and on this side is a salmon colored table. It's not that you can't see those, but you can't lock down on them because you can't fundamentally see the entire shape. You just have a feeling of the shape or a feeling of the color, but you're not looking directly at it. And if you practice this very, very much, you'll notice it's very difficult to just stay with the eye. We keep wanting to go over there and look. And the way I teach it, it's okay to look at it and then come back and continue to practice. Same thing with Shikantaza. You're sitting looking at the wall, look right at the wall. You can pick out a spot if you want to, just don't fasten down on it. Look at that spot or that crack or the irregularity in the wall surface, and then feel the person who's sitting next to you. You can get a feeling of they're sitting there. Their presence is there over here. You can hear the birds outside the window. You can feel the weight of your body and weight of your clothing on your shoulders and on your rest of your form, and your weight, gravity's pulling you down towards the cushion.
What about if we're still looking forward but not fastened on an object? Is that still the ego straight ahead bowing?
So I'm just using that as a reference. I'm not saying, oh, that's your ego. It's not that kind of I'm just saying it's because it's so centralized and you're able to lock down on it, then the ego makes use of that.
What about, you said anything that we fixate on is our ego? Bowing?
Well, it's the ego that fixates. That aspect of consciousness that thinks there is someone, that I am someone, and I know what's right and I know what's wrong, or I don't have a clue. I'm a terrible person. I'm always a failure. I can't figure out anything. I need to go and get a therapist, or I need to go meditate. The issue is there are kinds of meditation that will actually reinforce that structure, and then there are kinds of meditation that will lead you into the common word to use here is the truth or reality.
What about in a Dharma talk, when listening to the teacher?
What about it?
If we're fixating on the teacher, if we're trying to listen, is that the same thing as fixating?
Not necessarily. You need to listen. So you're listening. It's just that you don't need to understand it as it's showing up necessarily. Just receive it, and that way that it will enter your mind stream in just the way that it should, that it needs to, situationally. I know this from experience, having listened to lots of Dharma talks and come out and have no idea what was said. Further questions?
Kozan bowing.
Go ahead, Kozan.
A lot of times you say, give it your attention. If we use a simile that a mind is like a child who is demanding attention, sometimes it seems like it's good not to ignore them, but to give them the attention they're demanding seems to make it worse. So how can we give when our mind is being loud? How can we give it our attention without empowering that to do its antics?
Thank you for the question. you are mistaking empowerment. You are replacing the actual attention for empowerment, and that's ego language. Ego is trying to not be somebody who's trying to empower something. And that takes a lot of courage to look at the crap in your mind without wanting to do something about it. So like your question actually is saying that you're trying to find some way to, how can we do this without that happening? And I would say that needs to happen. Don't stop it. Sit down and just receive the whole 9-course meal, the whole 9, what is it, yards? Receive the whole thing. As soon as you're sitting down and practicing shikantaza, anything that arises needs to show up in consciousness. Even though as you described it, even though that difficulty, it's like, how can we do that without that happening? And what I would say is the ego is always trying to eliminate or stop something or make something go away. Does that make some sense to you, Kozan, what I'm saying?
Kozan bowing, yeah. If something is replaying in consciousness over and over and over, the metaphor of deepening the groove.
Yes.
Is there a way to work with that where it's like kind of stuck in the same groove?
Yeah, but see, look what you're saying. What you're saying in concepts is telling me that your awareness is right on this. And what I'm saying to you on top of that is continue to look at that. You don't have to get rid of that. You don't have to worry about a groove. The words groove, that's all psychology. That's relative. That's working with things in a relative way, as if there's something to fix. You don't have to worry about that groove. That's another way of working with it, relative way. This is not a relative way. This is a way where you see the ultimacy of your mind. And you do that by looking at the difficulty. You look at the groove. You look at the suffering. You look into all of those realms without fixing anything, without running away. So, more? Did you understand, or am I missing connection? I want to connect with you in that area so you can see there's nothing to fix.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Noka bowing for that example of empowerment or the groove. Is there a way to gaze at that the way we gaze at the wall?
Just don't do anything with it. If it shows up, receive it. If it goes away, just watch it leave. If it comes back, just watch it appear. Add nothing to it. No commentary on that particularly. Yogido.
Yogido bowing. When you were responding to Isaac, you said you didn't regret any Dharma talks or anything you said in those talks, and that there were no mistakes. So when we apologize, and I've heard you apologize, what are we apologizing for? Bowing.
The idea is to be polite and to be apologized for hurting someone or bumping into someone. It's just an apology. When I say, you've heard me say, apologize once, that means you really you bumped into somebody, you spilled somebody's spaghetti on the floor. Oops, sorry, I'm sorry about that. Say it once, that means you really mean it. But if you continue, that means it's more about you wanting to get let off the hook, wanting forgiveness. Forgiveness, I hesitate to say it this way, but I don't know how else to say it. It's just bullshit. You don't have the right to forgive anybody. Not that you can't do that. It needs to be very simple. Some people build this thing way up where you have to forgive, and you have to forgive how your father treated you. And no, you don't. You don't have to do that. That doesn't mean that you write it off and that person kind of what gets off the hook. I don't mean that. I'm just saying be very careful about that. When I say be careful, be very aware of what your intention is there to become this wonderful person who's able to forgive all the wrongdoers. That's ego, big time. So a little bit, either one of those, either I'm sorry, that's okay, don't worry about it. That's you're good, we're good. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about where we make some kind of trip about being all forgiving, and we try to train other people to be forgiving. Or if you want to do that, then go ahead. Perhaps I'm wrong. I probably am. Relatively, I am wrong, relatively. But I'm not teaching that. There are people who are doing it. Maybe you need to talk to them. I'm all about. Go ahead, please.
Is regret extra?
I think a regret is it's so wound up in the particular story of what is happening with you and how you're working with your mind and how you're working with your activity in the world. I'm not saying there isn't some remorse for things that have done. Even in our vows, it says, from beginningless times, all my wrong actions I have fully avow. I'm not quoting you exactly, but you're just acknowledging, I did that, I did this. I was the one that I regret is I was such a terrible thief when I was young, and it was just kind of a compulsive. If I could take something in a store or from a person, and I regret that. I regret it, but at the same time, I know that looking back at that, the causes and conditions that were with that young person that is not really here right now, I don't know what the karma is behind all of that. But then I have there's other people that would never think of taking somebody else's stuff. And I'm looking back on it, I don't know why that occurred. And I weaned myself away from it as soon as I could do that, which took a while. I think I was probably 20 before I could stop taking somebody else's stuff. It's very hard and very painful to look back on. So there's some regret there. But also I know, because I have an understanding about what this whole dynamic is, being a human being. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here with a teacher if I didn't have something to say to you about training your mind. And I do. And if you are here, then you probably are interested in hearing this. So there's nothing to fix. There's nothing to fix, but we can slow down and with outflows. Anytime you have an outflow, you do something. It comes out of something shows up. This is a dependent origination. Something shows up, and you can't just receive that. You think there's something wrong or something you need to lash out, so you can get rid of that outflow, because it's painful to just be responsible for what arises in your mind. Have you noticed that? You take any chance you can, any opportunity to blame anything. Not only blame someone out there, but blame yourself. That's also a difficult one. Watch that. When something arises in the mind, watch how we abandon it for something else. We go somewhere else with it. Judge someone. Yes.
Shogun, what's your vision for what this community, what it means for this community to stabilize?
Strong CCC, strong communication, cooperation, collaboration, and a really strong emphasis on the communication. We need to really stay in touch with each other in this core community, which is the monastery, the monks who live here. Really communicate with each other. So there's no gossip going around. As soon as gossip starts to show up, immediately turn that into communication with the people that are involved. So we do this together. We help each other, support each other, not judge each other, not talk behind anyone's back. Not just talking behind the teacher's back, but anyone's back. Don't talk behind anyone's back about anything. If it's an issue, then take it to them. I'm not saying with your mate or something, you couldn't say something negative about another person in the sangha. Of course, you're going to do a little bit of that, but keep it to a minimum. If it becomes something that's difficult, then get that person, take it to that person and talk to them about it. So that's one thing. Our communication, cooperation, collaboration is already really strong here, I think. It seems to me, when you say so. So that's there. Then also working with training our minds, and then see as we go along if there's ways, which we're working on right now, to reach out, trying to find ways to reach into the community, not trying to convert anybody to Buddhism. A person come into Karma House and over here and could never even know, like be in a yoga class, never even know that there's a monastery right next door. And so no interest in converting people, but just meet them where they're at. They may be any number of different combinations of religion or no religion, or so more specific. Yeah.
What are the 3 C's when we're working with someone who has no interest in training their mind?
Well, where are they at? Give me a bigger picture. Are they putting a roof on the house or something?
I was thinking of, in Karma House, there's a little retail space, so someone might come in for something like that, and maybe not be there for a meditation class or anything like that. So I'm just wondering what.
Well, we haven't gotten that off the ground yet, but that's there. But that got stopped by COVID mainly. So I'm not sure what your question is. There's cabinets with malas and so on and things, Dharma items there. So I'm not sure what you're asking. How would we relate to them? Yes, go ahead.
Do we work with the 3 C's differently depending on who we're talking to?
It's probably going to be a little bit situational, but basically the first one is to listen. But you might start out by saying, "What can I do for you?" Or what do you need? Well, I just wanted to come over here and I see Karma House, and I just wanted to come in to see what you were doing. And then you could tell them, then debate based on what you're seeing there, then you could tell them a little bit and tell them we're going to have an open house pretty soon and get their address or something like that. Just make it situational. Is that going towards what you're thinking about? So less is always better, unless it's about training your mind. And then it's get to the wall, get back to the teacher, the teaching in the community as much as possible, especially for a monk, but for anybody really, if you're trying to train your mind, whether you're ordained or not. Why do this otherwise? More? Further questions? Yes.
Jeez, I'm bowing. Something that's been coming up this last week is what is it to have a conviction, or what are convictions, and are there any on the path? Bowing.
How do you define conviction?
I guess when I think of it as a situation, it's feeling motivated to support or act on an idea or a group.
So the Buddhist path has some dynamics there that are like convictions. The vow, receive a vow, observe a vow, to see the truth, to be with all things, to return to the example of awakening, the Buddha, as far as we can understand. Return to the Dharma. There's lots of material there and so there's somewhat of a conviction or a wish, a desire, an intention to return to this. We continue to do that. Return to the cushion, no matter what, no matter what, no matter what.
More relative convictions seem to help centralize an identity. So whether it's a political or a social conviction, and I'm wondering how a conviction might change while we're on the path, or even interfere with the path.
Can I ask what are you looking at there? I'm not sure.
It could be anything from bodily autonomy, the right to bodily autonomy, or policing or war or equity, and those things feel like we have to support them because people are being hurt. And I'm just wondering how our relationship to those situations might change through sitting or if we're clinging to those convictions, if they could actually take us away from the path or interfere with training the mind, bowing.
Yeah, they probably could. So as we've been saying, everything is dependently risen, so there's no solid identity anywhere. It just it seems it's a very powerful illusion that you are somebody going somewhere, because you don't wake up in somebody else's body in somebody else's house, unless, well, you might. I think that would be kind of a shock. But there's a continuity to life that helps us identify with this person. Even though we're changing all the time, getting older, still there's a continuity there. But is there a solid, actual identity there? And so we quite often get our identity from having a conviction. And then we have that in here. Then we have this conviction. Then we have another conviction. We have another. It's a very similar situation in the Buddhist path. Is we need to have some kind of a structure. We need a place to meditate. In this situation, we have a monastery, one of the strongest environments you could have for meditation. But people have a room in their house where they meditate. They might even have a zendo, or they might just sit at a cushion right next to their bed. Lots of different structures there. And each person is going to do that however it shows up situationally. And I remember years ago when you've been here going on 11 years, I think. And is that true?
10 years this spring.
Okay,
Yes.
10 years. So I remember years ago you were thinking about going in the Peace Corps. I mean, you were living here. You've been here about 2 years, maybe.
It was within the first year of me being here.
Okay, and you were thinking about doing that, and I think I stopped you, didn't I? Or didn't I?
I had broken my back, and they wouldn't.
Oh, something else stopped.
They wouldn't. I didn't qualify because of my injury.
Oh, then I was just thinking about stopping you.
Had that my back not stopped me.
Yeah. So, and I probably wouldn't have talked you out of it particularly. I would have trusted whatever you wanted to do with your life. So, causes and conditions that are changing are just, you just need to watch those, observe those as much as possible, and not believe them, disbelieve them, or shut down on them. So then we can, because all of those things are changing slightly all the time, because causes and conditions are not static. They're in motion all the time. They are so much in motion. Everything is so much in motion that it looks like nothing happens. If you see dependent origination, that's how it looks. It doesn't look like anything's happening, because everything that seems to have a particularity comes from picking and choosing. And if you stop picking and choosing, then you see everything. And it's not a big whoop-de-doo event either. Nothing to brag about. So going back to your question, I would think that it could, things that arise in we've had people come here that look like they were going to stay here, and then things happened in their life that took them away and they're gone. They may be practicing in another place under another teacher. Nothing particular to correct there. Is there something else in the question?
Does the priority change as we begin to formalize our relationship to the path through Jukai or ordination, bowing?
What do you want to know?
If there should be any intentional moving away from certain things that we've been engaged in and prioritizing that energy into the path if we're beginning to take vows.
Okay, I think it's very situational, that some people can continue to operate in different ways. We have people here that none of them are here because they're all doing something else. And that something else, you could look at a situation like, well, they have to do that because of this and this and this. And then the other person, well, they have to do that because of this and this and this. So there's justifications for not being here. But so I'm not sure if that's where you're going. Should people stop doing that, or stop taking a vacation or something? Or
I'm thinking about just that mentality. Well, I'm not about to give up that view for the path, or I have to be. I can't stop. Fighting for this or for that.
I see. I just think it's so situational that some people. I even say, if you want to join a movement, go ahead. You can still meditate. If you're a monk and if you're someone I've ordained, you need to talk to me first. If it's something you want to do that I don't want you to do, I will ask for your robes back. Say, here, I'll keep these. You go climb Mount Everest, and when you get back down, if you do get back down, then come back and we'll retake your vows. We've done that, I think, with one person. And that was, it didn't work out as well as I would have liked, because they came back and then they left again and never talked to me again. Is that wrong? No, they're doing what they want to do, but it's their life. They're the one, it's their body-mind complex that's going back into the elements. Go ahead, do whatever you want with your life. You do whatever you want. But if you want this path, it's going to take some dedication, some devotion, and some intention. You have to intend to do this. And it takes a while. And it's not required. I'm not requiring this of anybody. I'll continue to talk to any person, even if they only meditate 3 times a year. It's up to you. You have to do it.
You sometimes quote, I think, Trungpa Rinpoche saying the best relationship is no relationship.
Yes.
What are you pointing at with no relationship?
What is he pointing at? I have no idea. I know what I'm pointing at when I say it is the relationship between yourself and someone else is an illusion. But don't believe that. Don't even bite down on it. Don't even try to unpack that and figure it. You cannot figure that out. That has to be seen. And the way it is seen is that there's no solid self in this kind that is yours or anyone else's. So when we say, well, I need to work on our relationship, well, maybe a little bit. When I say sit down and have a face-to-face interview, either with the teacher or with another sangha member or with your partner, something like that, I just think that's about communication, and how that shows up may reinforce the illusion of a relationship, and it may start to cause it to come apart. This may or may not be helpful, but any relationship you're in, you'll notice is constantly in flux. Sometimes it's just great, and sometimes it doesn't work so well, and then it goes another way. But what is it in the relationship that doesn't change at all? What is it in any relationship between you and another human being that is based on passion, aggression, ignorance? I like it. I don't know. You shouldn't have said that to me. Well, when I did this, and then you said, but you get to do this. But now look how you're all upset because you know what I'm talking about. All of you do. We do this constantly. It's a wonder we're not all in the insane asylum. Well, we kind of are. The world isn't a huge, what did Trungpa call it? Emergency room. If you're a bodhisattva, the whole world is an emergency room. And we're not saying don't do that. I'm not saying don't, but be aware of the way outflows. Something arises, totally your responsibility to receive that. Nobody poured this crap into you. But what do? We abandon what arises because it's uncomfortable, and we blame. Or we blame. Or we blame. Or we figure it out, or we calculate, or we have a description of why it's arising. It's like the difference between a particle and a wave, if you've read any of that material, which sometimes it's brought to a pedestrian level so you can kind of get an idea what they're talking about. But I have no idea how they even come up with those two differentiations in particle physics. But it's very interesting material because it's talking about the fundamental situation, which is not there. There is no fundamental there-ness to it, because if no one's looking at it, it's a wave. But if someone looks at it, it's a particle. What the hell is that about? It's an astonishing thing to contemplate, even if you are kind of slow on the draw as I am. Further?
Sure.
Go ahead.
What is bodily autonomy if there's no self?
How are you using bodily autonomy? What direction are you going with that?
Sure. I've heard it recently, just the term brought up in terms of people having the right to make decisions about their body. Should be up to you. There needs to be some communication, cooperation, collaboration going on there about that. So, like for instance, the bodily autonomy of having women decide about what's going to happen with their body, and not people in Washington D.C. or on the Supreme Court. It's kind of obvious. I don't know what I would say. That's obvious that women should decide themselves. Apparently, with a doctor, that should not be anyone's decision. It shouldn't be a political situation. That's a power thing. But then if you go to the other bodily situation, like I have a right to walk in a crowded theater and scream fire. I can say whatever I want, freedom of speech. So that might have to limit that bodily activity a little bit. The same way with when the overall consensus, and I don't know who's correct here or who's incorrect, because the politics have got in there and mucked the whole thing up. But the basic consensus is it's probably a good idea to get vaccinated. And there are people that I actually respect that don't agree with that. And I'm not sure why. I don't have the time to go into become a junior scientist with Mr. Wizard. Any of you watch with Mr. Wizard in the 1950s? Have no elderly people here, huh? Okay, I guess I'm in charge then. I'm the old man. But I mean, it's situational. Look at with some what's the word? Common sense, and say, well, yeah, you wouldn't if everyone is saying that we need to, and the powers that be in the medical community, the consensus happens to be, and we even see some proof now that if you have take these shots, they will help you, and they may prevent you spreading it further. Wear a mask and so on. All the craziness around that it's crazy. That's why they call it crazy. So in that situation, we should actually just have some regulations, and so that bodily autonomy, that's another one. There's a lot more. You have a direction where you're thinking about it? Sure, no. The questions coming out of it, it seems like there's an ego tendency to kind of create boundaries, but then is there a way we can have boundaries that don't feed the illusion of the self?
There's if you're clear, if you have some clarity about who you are and you're respectful of others, then the boundaries are quite obvious. So I'm not sure what your inquiry is about. If you could say a little bit more, maybe I can.
Well, I think you just answered it. Yeah. It sounded like you were saying the boundaries were situational.
They are. It's like someone's body is hands off. It's their body in almost every situation, unless they just fell out in the street and broke their leg. Then you wouldn't go up and say, do I have permission to help you, get you out of the traffic? You would take them out of the traffic. It's kind of somewhat of an assumption. That might be a little bit bizarre. You don't ask permission of parents to save their child if their child is running out between parked cars. You stop the child. But you really have no right to do that, because that's not your child. Don't you put your hands on. But the place is crazy enough that somebody could take you to court for touching their child. So there wasn't any traffic there. You're trying to molest them. That kind of stuff can happen. That kind of insanity happens. If you watch the news for a few minutes, you see people getting murdered by people who think that in order somebody won't stop for a traffic ticket, they should be murdered. I would say that's stepping across the boundaries. Just the whole structure of our system, of the police and the military and all that, shows you how insane the world is, that we need all that. And one of the things that Trungpa Rinpoche did that I did not agree with, having spent 4 years in the Marine Corps and having a father who was killed in World War II in Germany in 1945, having a little bit of experience with that, I did not particularly agree with his Vajragard or Dorje Kasam. Somehow came out of ancient Tibet, but I never had a chance to talk to him because I didn't have access to him. But I would have brought that up of why have a military? I don't know why. I really don't know why. Although he talked about it a few times. Well, you need some kind of a, something out there to protect the teacher, the teachings. So I don't know. Don't disagree. I just say I don't understand it, and I am not about to institute something like that.
Sokubang,
Yes, sir.
what is ignorance before we conclude it as ignorance?
Again, please.
Sokubang, what is ignorance before it is and concluded as ignorance?
Then it's ignorance. And when you conclude it as ignorance, then there's some awareness around some aspect of your shutting down or distracting yourself. So if you're aware that you're distracting yourself, it might not be really strong, but there might be just a feeling that you're missing something. You get, do you follow me a little bit? Am I getting close to what you're looking for?
Shokubang, yes, I'm looking at something arises that looks like it's covering up something, and the tendency to want to fight with it, to uncover it and see what's there.
So the way that is done is to just look at the cover up. Don't remove it. Removing the cover up, there's a credential there, and you haven't really. You're still operating it with it as if there's a right or wrong or correct and incorrect, and that is valid to some extent. But the way to work with that is just to watch the cover up, watch yourself cover things up, watch yourself grasp at emotions, and watch yourself believe in you're angry. Instead of stopping the angry, shutting down the anger, or having an outflow that is where you're enraged at someone or yourself or a situation, just be responsible for that anger. And how do you do that? Feel it. Want to spell that again? F-E-E-L. Feel it. Don't think it. Feel it. And I say even let is extra, because then it involves some kind of identity that's actually giving something permission. Don't do that either. Don't get any credential out of it. Feel the crap you're trying to get rid of. Don't miss your life. When I talk about this, I sometimes think I should talk more about it, because people have emotions they think they shouldn't have. And I'm telling you, with as much force and energy behind my words, whatever you're feeling, you're supposed to have. This is your life. You're a living being, insofar as you're anything at all. And so whatever happens in your life, in your neighborhood, at your kitchen table, it's not that it's correct or right or pleasant, but it needs to occur. And your way of responding to that may be to tell the person to leave your house. I'm not saying you shouldn't do something like that. You can't talk to me that way. You're going to have to leave. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen, but there needs to be some kind of strong ability or practice where you're practicing receiving your thoughts, so that when life starts coming to you in the form of its very solid thoughts, called other people, situations, receive it, observe it, look at it, consider it, give it a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, unless it's an AK-47 pointed at you, and then you might want to run. So there are variations on that theme. There's not one standard that you should do, but you could consider when something arises in your mind stream as anger, passion, aggression, ignorance, you could consider just watching that and treating that as sometimes what we call a dharma gate, where there's something, if you look at it, You look at it, you don't push on it. You look at it, you don't pull on it. You look at it, you don't distract yourself to some other thing there. You just observe that and see if it opens. If you look at it clearly enough, it stops becoming a gate. It's only a gate because of passion, aggression, and ignorance.
Jishin bowing. Following Shoka's question and your answer, do we have to first conclude before we become aware of something? Bowing.
Conclude?
Yes.
I'm not sure I follow. Conclude.
You said to Shoka that before concluding, it is ignorance. So for something not to be ignored, do we have to first conclude and then become aware of it, that it's not ignorance? Bowing.
No, so I'm saying I might have missed his question. Maybe you understood his question and I didn't, but I understood it to be ignorance that we are aware of, and ignorance that we're not aware of. Ignorance that we're not aware of is just that. It's the basic ignorance. One of the profound forms of ignorance that we can address here right away is ignorance of there being no self, the actual belief that there is someone in the skandhas. There's some person here who can win or lose, live or die. The identification with the body. And so the other kind of ignorance is that you're more aware of is when you know you are distracting yourself deliberately from something. When you're talking to someone and they're talking and you just realize that you've not heard the last 3-4 sentences they've said, you just ignored them. So you might be aware that you're ignoring them. You may even come back and you say, I was daydreaming. I was daydreaming when you said that, or ignoring. Excuse me, could you repeat what you said? And most people would say, yeah, I think so. I think I can repeat part of it. But that would be an ignoring that was, that you would be kind of in retrospect and ignore that you just shut down on that. And I think that's where Shoka is going with it. Shoka, did I get close to what you were looking for?
Sokuzan, yes. And I have a question further about that. When you talk about feeling deeply, what does it look like to feel ignorance deeply?
That's how it feels. Did you hear me? Did you hear me? I said that's how it feels.
Shokubang, in that moment, I watched myself move away from what you were doing. Is that what you're pointing to?
If that's what you saw, yes. I teach out of this. I don't know anything. I don't need to have that to teach. If something comes up I need to talk about, it'll appear. If it doesn't, then I don't look for it. Further questions?
Keep going.
No, go ahead.
What does it look like to act out of no self?
You won't know what you're doing. You won't have the cooperation of your self-centeredness telling you in the back of your mind, this is okay, just keep going. You got this. Or be real careful here because I'm not sure what's going to happen next. You'll have that little chatter, subconscious gossip, as Trungpa used to call it. That commentary, constant commentary about right and wrong, should you, shouldn't you, Is this right? Shouldn't you do this? Shouldn't I do that? What's happening here? What do they really mean when they say this? And a constant reiteration or commentary or elaboration on everything, constant elaboration. And what it looks like is not much is happening. You just function. This doesn't mean you don't try to find out where you put the fork at when you're getting ready to eat. You thought you set the table and now you can't find the fork. Sure, I set that down. Doesn't mean that you don't directly approach anything as something you might need to think about a little bit situationally. And so things come up situationally and you relate to them very directly as they are, and not abandon what's arising for what you think about it. What do you think about all that? What do you think? What do you think about what I'm thinking about, what you're thinking? It's an incredible elaboration. We call it society, or we call it a conversation. Next time you have a conversation with anyone, put it on receive about 90% of the time and see what the intention of your intention is, other than to try to receive, but also the intention of the speaker. If they're just filling the room up with their language about their busted piano bench. Further questions?
Augie bowing.
Augie.
Going back to Juzan's question about relationship, if it's a kind of illusion that there are separate people in relationship with each other, is it an illusion as well that there are separate people conscious of each other? Bowing.
Well, they're conscious of they're conscious of the other human form, but when they see that, they are aware of their assumptions or ideas or projections and their beliefs and their opinions about that person. So you're always relating to projections of your own mind until you're not. You're in a relationship. How's it working for you?
It's working.
Good.
Bowing. But in another direction, maybe you've said that we don't have individual consciousness. You've said. So in that regard,
I'll say a little bit. They individuate based on the belief in an ego. If you believe you are somebody, then you have access to consciousness, because it doesn't belong to anyone unless there's a body-mind complex. That aspect of the consciousness that is showing up through the eyes, through the ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, thought process, through the brain, through the what's that nerve called?
Polyvagal.
The polyvagal nerve is that one, and then there's a whole bunch of other nerves in there. But I don't know much about them. I just know they're there. But what I'm saying, it's difficult to talk about it because it's both. It's somebody, and it's not somebody. So it's somebody. The identification of a body-mind complex as being somebody is very powerful. And we when we have a conversation with someone, we think about what we're thinking about. I'm thinking about what you're thinking about. What I'm thinking about what you're, and we just build a whole structure of that we call a conversation. So it's not like it's not the emptiness of absence. It's the emptiness of a self. So there is something there, but it is not separate. It is consciousness itself, and it's not. And it can do whatever it needs to do. It can shrink right up into what you're looking at, and it can expand infinitely. And it's not some kind. There's no ego there who's thinking, "Oh, how wonderful I am! I just realized I'm a supernova, a black hole, and the moons of Jupiter all at once. How amazing!" I never thought about that before, but now that I'm thinking about it, why not? So it's not that. It's even more than that. It's more astonishing than just a bunch of items in space. It's more profound and vast. And it's also minute and singular and on a point at the same time. That's why this mentioned earlier, the idea of an observer in physics has become very important, as perhaps you know, any of you have dabbled around in that. And I think I said earlier, it's a wave until somebody looks at it, and then it's a particle. It just shows you the fundamental nature of everything is unreal. I got about 20 more years here before I reach 100. So if you have any more questions.
Bowing.
Go ahead.
You mentioned a few days ago something about the force of gravity, and you left us with the question whether the force of gravity is actually about pulling us down or pushing. I'm wondering whether our view or perspective of our situation is changing, depends on the huge force like this, whether that force is pulling or pushing.
So I think it's doing both. It's interesting though. It's an area that you can't, because we're so used to it. Gravity, you know, from the time you were 6 years old and jump from the top bunk of your bunk beds, you know, gravity. I was quite perplexed at that when I was very young, that there even could be such a thing. But I'm pretty convinced now. So I don't think those two things are separate. It looks like when I say gravity only pulls, actually that's untrue. That's just how it appears. Maybe it's pushing. Maybe it's doing both. There's no one that can really explain what gravity is. They can talk about it and sound very scientific, but do you happen to know what gravity is? You just called him a liar? It's a big secret. I'll take one more question if there is one. If not, we can go ahead and close.
Wulong Bowing.
Wulong.
Talking about no relationships. How do you know I'm sorry, I'm formulating the question as in a relationship, how do you know when things are falling apart, if it is the concept of relationship that's falling apart, or if that is reinforcing the concept of two people in a relationship?
Okay, I can say a little bit about it, but when I'm using concepts, it's difficult to talk about something that you have to perceive. It's like I'm going to try to, you never heard a cardinal, but I'm going to describe what they sound like. Impossible. I can't do that. I mean, even though I have a wonderful voice, don't I? Okay, maybe I don't. I was hoping to get some agreement. So here's what I'm going to say to respond to that. That if you ask about how do you know if it's falling apart, I can address that. You'll know that it's falling apart when you are talking to someone and you're in a relationship with them, to use the conventional word, and you see that you're not there. You see that it's just them. There is no relationship. Your heart breaks about them. And even though there's no heart, there isn't anyone else. Everything is even the otherness is empty of other also, but it starts by falling apart here, and then eventually it falls apart there, and then you have, not only you have anuttara samyak sambodhi, but complete wisdom, but you also have compassion, which is not a feeling.
Wulong Bowing. Can that falling apart also look like everything, it breaks your heart in that moment?
Of course. Exactly. Exactly. I have a question from Yu Hong, I think.
So my question is, how do we know we are ignored? If we are ignored, how can we ask? Or not ask?
How do we know if we're ignoring something?
How do we know we are ignored? Somebody ignored us.
Oh, I'm not sure how that would work. Someone is ignoring us. That might be more of a social dynamic. But parents ignore their children by not meeting them where they're at. They just shut down on who's in front of them and just lay a trip on them, so to speak, to use a kind of a conventional word. They just try to make them fit into a certain structure and don't really appreciate them. They ignore them. Ignore the incredible singularity we call this human life, rather than just really looking at that person and seeing what could we really do for this young person to help them fundamentally train their mind, become educated in a way that would fundamentally help them, rather than try to lay some kind of trip on them, get them to live up to some kind of standard of how a 8-year-old should act. I'm not sure that's what you're asking about, but that's what came out.
Thank you. That's helpful. But what if just during normal conversation, I feel like I'm ignored? Part of my ego is, I should not ignored. So if I ask, how can I observe when I ask the question?
I'm a little confused by what you're asking, but am I hearing you say or ask that you want to know how you can know if they're ignoring you? Yeah.
Yes.
Everybody's ignoring you. Very, very rare to meet someone that isn't shut down in a lot of ways. And you're peeking through there a little bit, what's actually there. They're receiving some of you, but they don't really receive you as they are, because they have their concepts and ideas all around you to block out who is actually there. They're blocking it out. What do you do about that? Train your mind. You train your mind, so you can see clearly the degree to which people are suffering and tend to block things out, especially people with no mind training tend to just shut down and blame others for how they feel, or maybe blame themselves. It's whole societies have structures and mores and rules and laws that set up a structure so you can't really get to know who you are. You're too busy trying to live up to other people's ideas of how you should be, or how you should act, or what's valuable, what's not valuable, who you should vote for. It's a big mess. Samsara. Very good. So I guess we can close. Thank you so much for your questions.